Okay, now let's put it all together. We want to look at routing using Express combined with templates using nunchucks, all within a Node.js app using the Node driver for MongoDB. So this should look pretty familiar. Here we're simply combining all of the dependencies that we need for this application. Here we're setting up our templates. Here we're creating the necessary application settings so that our templates will render properly. And then finally, we're connecting to the MongoDB database. Now, we can't do anything in this application without a live connection to MongoDB because this new version of our application is backed by MongoDB. We're actually going to interact with that same movie data we were looking at earlier. So what this means is that the routes that this application supports are going to be making queries to the MongoDB database in order to create a response to the request or to render a web page that will then be served back to the client. So the meat of this application is right here. As I said, we're going to connect to the MongoDB database first, and we need a connection before we can do anything. So that means that we need to set up our app in the context of that connection. There are a variety of different ways we could do this. This is what I think is probably the simplest at this stage of the course. What we're doing here is setting up our entire app in the callback for this connect request. What's most important is that this DB connection is in scope for any of the route handlers. Now, in this particular app, we have just one real route handler. We do have this fall through that will return a 404 for any routes that are requested other than the root route or slash. But for this route handler, because we're going to be making a query to MongoDB, we need access to that DB handler, that connection. And you can see here in the route handler for slash, we're using DB and issuing a find command, as we did previously, to our running instance of MongoDB. Now let's take a look at the callback for this call to find. And this is where we're actually calling on our template engine to render a response for us that will then be handed back to the client as the response for this route that's requested using an HTTP GET request. Okay, so we're going to use the render command of the response object that Express will pass into this route handler. And here we're going to use the movies template. And to that template, we're going to pass this object. This object is where we're going to end up passing all of the documents that we got back from our call to find here. Those documents will be passed in as the output of this toArray method that we're calling on the cursor that we get back from find as a result of having made this empty doc query. Now, in an ordinary application, you probably wouldn't make a query like this. But for purposes of simplicity, what we're saying here is just give me all the records that are in our movies collection, because I'm going to use them to render a response to the client. Okay, let's take a look now at the movies template. And you can see that it's quite a bit more complex than the one we looked at before for a couple of reasons. One, I wanted to give you just a taste for what's possible with this template system. And I wanted to give you some exposure to the syntax for writing templates, in case this is something that you're seeing for the first time or don't have a lot of experience with. Now, for this part here, I did that just so I can use Helvetica as my font. And you can see that I'm simply embedding a style sheet. Here, we're going to have a section of the page. Essentially, the page is going to be titled by movies. But then we're doing this kind of cool thing where we're going to be using that movies field passed here as part of the object that we're passing to render. And we know this is an array because that's what toArray produces and passes on here. This particular tag in our template is just a for loop, much like you would see in a variety of programming languages. This is actually a for each loop. This is saying, give me all the movies one at a time from that array that we passed into this template. So here what I'm doing then is just creating an unordered list. And what I'm going to do is list the title and year for each movie and link each movie to the appropriate page on the IMDb movie site using the IMDb field. So this is pretty cool because we're using a variable here embedded within this URL, and each one of these variables is actually pulling a field value out of a JavaScript object. Okay, now one thing I did forget to do here actually, just to have good HTML syntax, is actually wrap the list items in an unordered list tag. Okay, so now let's just go back to our app and finish up our discussion of the app itself. After we've specified our routes, I'm simply going to kick off the server. And remember, this is all happening inside the callback for our connect request to the MongoDB database. So what's going to end up happening here is after that connection is made, I'll kick off the server. Because of the way we've set up these routes, the one route we're really supporting has the database connection in scope. So anytime it's called by a client, it can use that connection to make a query to the database. And of course, there's a lot of error handling and other sort of framework that we would really want to put in for a nice, robust production application. This is just a simple example. Okay, so now let's go and run this app. But what I'll need to do first, of course, is install my dependencies. Now, in this case, what I've done is created a package.json file that will tell NPM what dependencies this app has. So I can simply call npm install, and all of the dependencies will install based on what's here in my package.json file. Okay, so let's run the app first, and then we'll come back to this and talk a little bit about the package.json file. Okay, so we successfully connected to MongoDB, and we've got our server listening on port 3000. So now, if we go to localhost port 3000, pretty cool, huh? Got our movies listed out, and each one of these is linked to the appropriate page on IMDb. Okay, so now let's go back to our package.json file and walk through that just a little bit as we wrap up this lesson. So I'll kill the server and load up our package.json file. So if you look at the NPM documentation, you can get all the information you need to understand how to write your own package files. The reason why I wanted to include one here is because for the remainder of the course, we'll be providing package.json files with handouts, homework assignments, etc. And I want to make sure you understand what's going on. So the key piece here is this dependencies field within this file. And you can see here that we're specifying that we have dependencies on Express, Consolidate, Nunchucks, and MongoDB. And the way I express dependencies is using name-value pairs, the name being the name of the NPM package, and the value being what version I'm interested in having. Now, because all of our dependencies are moving, that is, the development is ongoing, in order to make sure that they don't move too much on us and break our apps, I like to pin them pretty close to the version I use to develop any examples or handouts. So what this syntax means here with the tilde is this is the version that I want, okay? It's okay to install patch versions. That is, I could install for Express 14.13.4, okay? But don't install 14.13.2, and don't install anything greater than 4.13. So 4.14 or 15, okay? And same is true with the rest of these. So I'm trusting the developers here to not make breaking changes when they're basically doing bug fixes, and using that as a means of kind of pinning the dependencies for my application so that it remains fairly stable. Okay, a couple of other fields here, basically just descriptors, name of the project, I entitled it all together now, a version, brief description, and then my name and the license we're distributing this with. So there you have it. We've taken a look at an app that combines routing with Express, templating using Nunchucks, all wired together using Express, and writing an application backed by MongoDB in Node.js using the Node.js driver.